to be honest, we don't have an ecosystem per se. There's no culture. There's not this mindset of people wanting to build together. Every time a student or person or a builder reaches that ambition, they just move to San Francisco and they get it done there.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Not a Minimum Viable podcast. Today, we're joined by Adib, a researcher obsessed with intelligence in all its forms. From decoding DNA sequences with codon transformer to building reasoning models for biology. And from studying actual human brains to creating AI that can process electronic health records. He's pushing boundaries in research while simultaneously putting Toronto on the AI map with GenAI Genesis, Canada's largest AI hackathon. Welcome to the podcast, Adib.
Thank you for having me.
Before we dive into the actual show, I'm curious to know, how did you and Rudy meet first?
Oh, that's interesting. I think we met at New Builds Hackathon at the Cohere office around November. Randomly got teamed up to work on a project together, and that led us to getting to know each other and becoming friends. So shout out to Internet Wien for connecting us together.
It's actually crazy how much Internet Bin is responsible for whatever goes on in the Toronto tech scene.
Crazy.
Yeah, the whole new builds thing was a very interesting thing because, just for context, the way me and Adib got teamed up was kind of random, but not really. They had this thing where you had team leaders who would come on to the stage and you would select players based on like Pokemon-esque cards. So Adib had like an interesting card that had some like AI and ML specific things on it, and I was like, that's cool. So I ended up selecting it and a bunch of other people, and that's how we ended up in the same team.
In fact, the CEO of Ribbon was also in our team, and he went on to raise like $8 million for his seed round. We just had time to casually make a project together over a weekend.
Someday maybe he'll be on the podcast as well. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, and Adi, before we get into some of the questions we have for you, do you want to give us like a quick brief into what your journey's been so far, whether that's academia, work, Toronto life in general? Where do we find you today?
I actually started from Iran, which is a very nice country, way far from Canada. 18 years in the life, I had no idea I'll ever leave my hometown, but I ended up like studying so much biology that I made it to the International Biology Olympiad, and that's where I got to meet a friend who was studying at who wanted to go to study at the University of Toronto. He was part of the Canadian bio team. And he was like, "Yeah, you should come here. It's so fun, and you're able to do like interesting research and get involved with so many cool things back then." And being the person I am, like I thought that that's going to be an interesting experience. So I decided to apply for, just coming to study abroad. I just applied to U of T because my friend kind of suggested, and somehow we got in. So we just bought a ticket, got the visa, came here, and started our journey at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, in first year biotech student. But unfortunately, we somehow ended up in computer science after, and we've been doing some AI research with a bit of bio and healthcare taste in it ever since.
Well, what was that process of getting into research? Because I know from personal experience, there's a lot of first year students in CS, maybe other fields as well, that want to begin research. What was your journey of like just being another first year student and then cracking and making that first step into doing research at university?
To be honest, I never expected I'll get this deep in research. Originally, my goal was to learn AI, and in order to be great at something, you need to do it. You need to practice it, think about it, work on it. And so I thought research is going to be a great way to get started in doing some cool AI projects and getting deeper into the field. And back then, like AI was just getting started. It was just ChatGPT had only arrived like a few months ago. People were just starting to see what is neural networks, what is like backprop. And so I kind of hopped in on the ride and started studying these. And there was a professor at the University of Toronto who was a completely like a bio professor at the department. And he had also got interested in it a year before, and he was studying like machine learning on his own and working on some random AI startup on the side. And I had a chance to talk to him and tell him that I'm interested in this field and I have this idea of like doing some cool bio project. And he was like, "Sure, I'm also interested to work with you and kind of teach you and guide you through this process," as he saw some potential in me. And that's how we got started on the research, which ended up being codon transformer and got into Nature Communications.
That's pretty cool. So just for everybody who's listening and who's not aware of like your research background, could you give us a bit of an overview of, I guess, a little bit of everything that you've been involved in regarding research and AI so far?
Oh, that's going to be a lot. So I think I first started with the computational biology space. We worked on creating a model that would essentially give you the most optimized DNA sequence for a given protein. And the main motivation for this was if you want to translate any protein, like let's say human insulin in some organism like bacteria, what DNA should you choose? And it's a very hard biological problem that was kind of intriguing for me. I started from there, and then somehow I got into the healthcare system. I did an internship at Vector Institute working on EHR foundation models, EHR like electronic health records. And from there, we also worked on like medical representation learning and building medical foundation models. From there onwards, I joined Professor Bo Wang's lab at UHN, which was very transformative experience. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that. And there, I've been working on like medical reasoning agents for chest X-ray, and most recently, we published BioReason, which was integrating multimodal reasoning language models with DNA foundation models to drive biological reasoning.
And how did that lead you to Cohere, or is that like a separate journey altogether?
I think Cohere actually started from new builds. Like I was very like fond of the company, following like people on Twitter and like seeing what the company was doing. But it was only through new builds that I came to the office. I was like sleeping here, like eating their bananas and kind of getting a sense of what it means to be in the culture of AI and tech. And that got me really hooked up. I found a real interest outside research. I got lucky that I got to go to NeurIPS in December in Vancouver because of like my paper EHR Mamba had got into one of these symposiums there. And there's like when I like met some more of the Cohere folks in Cohere party, and I kind of like talked to them and they got interested in my experiences, and I also got interested in what they had in mind for some summer intern projects, and the rest is history.
Wait, that's really cool though, because from an outsider's perspective, I feel in most fields it's a lot harder to go from academia or research background straight into industry. And when you're talking about the way you network this, I don't even know if I'd call that networking in the traditional sense, because it doesn't sound like you're actively seeking them out. It was happenstance. And that's kind of like serendipitous, I guess. But has that journey so far been what you expected coming to industry from academia? The culture shift, has there been a difference in the way you're approaching the work?
Most certainly. Academia and industry are very, very different. And I think the main difference is the number of GPUs you have access to. That's like the bread and butter that affects the research these two do. When you're in academia, you are compute bound. You don't have enough GPUs. And so your research problems either go towards directions that you don't have enough, like not having enough compute is not going to be an issue, or you're going to do baby runs, baby experiments that with a little compute you can get results that hopefully extrapolates in scaling, but you argue that even if it does not scale, it's showing something very meaningful. But once you come to the industry, the problem completely changes to if you have tons of GPUs and compute, what problems are worth solving that will drive shareholder value and make money? You're essentially optimizing for ROI. And in that situation, your research isn't about proving something or enhancing something or showing new perspectives. It's about maximizing the amount of money you can make. And that really changes how you approach problems. You're thinking about the end goal, you're thinking about efficiency, you're thinking about how to leverage your resources the best way. And you're, of course, more ambitious. You have more human and compute resources to throw at things. So you're willing to take more risks, explore bigger ideas, and ultimately, you're able to, I would say, drive more impact than academic research because of the amount of resources you have access to.
Then let me ask you this: in industry, let's say you're doing all this research at Cohere, the impact is kind of grounded in the problem that the company is trying to solve, right? In research, though, you mentioned EHR Mamba, the bioreasoning model. Sure, all these researches are progressing the field, the frontier of the field forward. But what does this actually mean for somebody sitting in a hospital in Toronto right now? What is the impact that this research is having on them?
Exactly why I think academic research is different. Because when you're doing the research, you really don't think about the hospital. You don't really think about the end customer per se. You're caring about the methodology and the way that you gets you there. To give you an example, EHR Mamba is the most efficient model in processing EHR data that achieves the same or even better performance than any other model out there. And this is important research because in a hospital, you're compute bound. You don't have GPUs. So if you really want to run your EHRs through machine learning models to drive insights, you need to use something very efficient. That's why we did EHR Mamba. And now it's open source. It's gotten like 10 citations in the last like few months. It's been probably one of those papers that people start building on top of, etc. But there's no hospital deploying it. There's no one caring about it. And that's because the EHR space is completely different in industry than in academia. In industry, like you have to integrate so many data, you have privacy issues, you have other models available, there's the hospital's bureaucracy, and all of these combined just dilute the effect of any research you do beforehand because you're not that founder going in the hospital trying to sell these softwares and just making them better and work for the patients. And I think both of these approaches are necessary because in the end of the day, everything in the industry came from some root in academic research. The classic example is, pretty much dating back to like biology, where like academia was the main driver of all of those researches. Like insulin was discovered in the University of Toronto. Now, of course, there's a huge industry now after everything that academia researched. Um, but ultimately, it's more about academics solve the primary bottlenecks, the primary next steps that they imagine is right. And business and researchers in the industry will focus on how to actually deploy those in the real world to solve customer problems and drive revenue for their shareholders.
You mentioned this idea of healthcare having a lot of bureaucracy. I've heard that healthcare and health tech in general just has so much more regulation around it in terms of what you can do because of all the higher privacy issues and concerns. Does that spill over into the research as well in terms of the access to the data that you have?
Exactly. Even one of the interesting classic examples of this is chest x-rays. So right now, a lot of healthcare models have been built and are being built on analyzing chest x-rays. It's the most versatilely available data, even public or private, and it has a huge billion-dollar business around it that hospitals go through. And it's been 10 years since we've developed machine learning models that we theorize can solve chest X-ray interpretation. We believe they have the technology necessary. The bottleneck is the data because you want to ensure you train on enough humans' chest X-rays so it can generalize across hospitals, across different people with different features. But that data is confined in hospitals. And for a hospital, their data is money, it's power, it's their everything. They're not willing to even sell it to outsiders when they don't know what they can do with their data that an outsider can probably do more. And when this data is not available, there is no machine learning. Machine without data can't learn. And as a result of that, the whole field's research has always been we have some random public data set that's been open for 10 years or 5 years, and we were all just training models on it with a bit of an 1 to 2% improvement each year. And you circle back and you think, obviously, the technology here is not limiting, it's the data. And nobody is working on the data because the hospital is not willing to give and sell it out to you, and they can use patient privacy as a great excuse not to do so. And on the other hand, the hospital is not doing these things in-house. They're not training models. And even if they do, they're still data bound themselves because they're just one hospital. That's what ultimately limits the industry in this space. So if you have a startup, you're solving chest X-ray analysis, where do you get your data? You have to ultimately just go down there, buy data from many hospitals, train your models, and then deploy it back to those same hospitals to generalize. And I think ultimately we have to just think back towards this healthcare industry and say, if we want to live in a world that data is so decentralized, so centralized that we can't improve patient care, and in this then should we really consider privacy and the rights of hospitals in the light of saving patients' lives? Um, to me, there's a big trade-off here.
That's an interesting bottleneck to like come across, I think. And something you mentioned earlier was also that how academia solves some of these initial bottlenecks and then industry sort of takes over, right, and runs with it. And I was reading about this old theory in operations management the other day by this researcher called Stafford Beer, I think, where he says that it is not necessary to enter the black box to understand the nature of the function it performs, right? Basically, systems, you don't need to understand the inner working of a system to know how it behaves in the world. So I'm curious, in the context of artificial and biological intelligence, do you think we ever get to a point with AI where, as long as it's replicating human reasoning or behavior, we aren't as concerned with how or why? Whether there's an academia approach to this or an industry approach to this, I'll leave up to you.
I would be very scared when AI reaches human level and beyond intelligence. I don't think human intelligence is superior. We are very, very compute bound. If you think about your brain, you're running on small amounts of electricity and we're highly efficient in using that, which means in the space of possible intelligences, we are on the lower end. We're trying to keep ourselves compute efficient. Once you unlock that efficiency to the point you can throw infinite compute at something and that thing will keep scaling with that compute, then you're talking about a new type of intelligence. You're talking about a new scaling law for intelligence. And that scares me because we are on that track. We are right now on that graph, just keeping going up. And at some point, we'll surpass humans, maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now. But we will do that. And once you have something that's smarter than you, whether industry made it or academia, which probably industry will, it's out of hands. You can't control something that's smarter than you. It's just not going to happen. So you have to think very hardly about what you're building, because if you do it wrong as a species, you're essentially making something that can destroy you. And you're doing that thinking you can control it, but once it becomes smarter than you, it will show you that you can.
Yeah, so and this brings me to something I was reading right the other day was that Meta announced that they essentially want their models to take over advertising as a job function entirely when they're, you know, coming up with copy or doing pitches and then the final run out as well. And that scares me because now you're talking about eliminating an entire job function or by and large an industry as well, right? When it comes to something like that, like you mentioned, you have to think hard about the consequences of your actions. Do you think industry by and large is cognizant of these trade-offs, or is it something that we're willing to overlook for the sake of making that next big jump and being the first to do it and winning that race essentially?
Unfortunately, I think industry is built around maximizing revenue for shareholders. And the thing that will maximize revenue is AI, not humans. In other words, I see a future in which we're willing to take humans' jobs away, give it to AI, because AI can just do it way more cheaper, faster, and efficient. And this profit will go back to the company using intelligence and the company wrapping intelligence. There are only two winners here. And the person who loses their job are going to be outside that loop. We might say we'll give them some universal basic income, but that to me kind of brings me back to the 16s, like, when we had aristocrats and peasants, and aristocrats would kind of distribute some breads as universal income to those peasants. I do think we're moving towards such a society, and that by far comes from the fact that we are touching a technology which is describing and manipulating intelligence. Anything else, like internet, I don't know, even go back to the creation of the wheel, whatever. All of these could be assets to a human. And as a result, just take jobs, make new jobs, and just keep transforming humanity towards better and better, towards being a better and better species. But once you start dealing with intelligence, like the faith is the fundamental elixir of life, you no longer are bound by any technology. You can do whatever you want. Like envision an industry, a future in which robots and AI will do every single thing that humans are doing. They'll essentially create their own economy, a very big economy, the biggest it could ever be. Everything is available. Everything you want to buy, everything you want to see, use, eat, all of it will just be available because robots and AIs are just taking care of themselves and taking care of producing these things and providing them to you for free. There's going to be no cost at all here. And so the profits should go somewhere and they go to the people who control intelligence, right? And the people that can't work and can't be part of that loop, they can't be part of the economy anymore. They will not get anything back. And that's the existential threat because the people, if you can't feed those people, you're going to start internal wars with them. And if you want to give them universal basic income after they've had this privilege of living that, you can't expect them to go back to being peasants anymore. And so the only workaround here is to either for government to just intervene, make sure AI is developed safely and with the prosperity that it should bring for all humans, or don't develop it at all. But to me, it seems we are taking neither paths. So I wouldn't be super optimistic about 20, 30 years down the road.
Interesting. Okay. Adib, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are 20 years old, right?
Yes, up to it.
Right. So you're 20 years old, you're still an undergrad. but at the same time, you've published in top tier conferences, journals, Nature Communication, Neurips, etc., and you've worked with some of the world's top AI labs, Vector, UHN, Cohere, for example. How do you navigate being taken seriously in a room where everybody else has PhDs when they're doing this research while you're an undergrad, 20, you know?
It's kind of funny you mention it. I would do say something correct that I don't have a nurse paper, I have an ISAML paper, but it's kind of a minor thing. Um, I would say a lot of this comes from mutual respect. In BioReason, the most recent paper we had, I was working with PhD students at the lab. Essentially, when you respect someone's abilities and they respect your abilities, then the titles don't matter. It doesn't matter you're an undergrad and they're a PhD student, or this is a scientist at UHN and you're just a 20-year-old. What matters is a few people respect each other's abilities, have a shared vision, want to work together to get to that vision, and they have just different responsibilities. One of them is more like a project manager, main driver of the research, and the other one is more like an advisor and supporter as things go along. And once you think of it that way, of course, given that everyone thinks of it that way, then you don't even realize that you're an undergrad and you're working with PhD students, or maybe you're like kind of distributing tasks towards each other. So I wouldn't think of it like that. I would say if you're in the right place, you see the right people, there's the right talent, and of course that brings respect natively, then there are bigger problems to solve. These things don't really have their positions and their place when you're busy building something wonderful and they are in the same vision and they're helping you out there.
I felt it at least for a bit transitioning from university life to work life, that there is often a sense when you walk into a room that I definitely am not the smartest person in this room. I might not know enough about the things that these people are talking about. Some people here have dedicated their lives to this. But then for me, it translated into something more comforting on the other side. I was like, I'm not bounded by some of the things they're bounded by anymore. Like, I can use them as resources and I can like further myself a lot more now. Like, my headroom for growth is far greater. But that was how I translated it. I'm curious if you ever encounter that, and if so, like, how do you reframe that question in your head?
When I was in high school, I was, in biology Olympiad, the youngest to get number one gold, you're kind of like a national celebrity and like a national elite. They literally give you the elite title. I was very puffed. I was very fond of myself. I thought, oh, I'm the god here. There's no one on top of me. And literally, figuratively, there was no one on top of me. That's probably what caused it. And then I decided I'm going to come to Canada because I couldn't just withstand it. I was like going to a university and I'm like talking to a professor as if I know more than them. And I would realize they're just these things that shouldn't be there, but I just couldn't control myself because the environment had feed it into me. And then you come to Canada and you tell people about the Bio Olympiad, and they're like, what even is that? And that moment you suddenly realize everything you have is just in your head. And the world out there is just way bigger. Here, you could be a 20-year-old who's a billionaire. That's just a magnificently larger scale and spectrum to look at. And if you think about all these people with different ages, with different accomplishments and goals and successes and lives, then you realize that your life as it stands is very, very small compared to them. So it doesn't leave any space for you to be fond of yourself, and also doesn't leave any space for you to have things like imposter syndrome. Because you're no one, like you will get imposter syndrome if you are someone and you don't think you're that. You are no one. It's just much vaster than you can imagine. And so this kind of inspires you to think it's actually good that these people are ahead of me. Then it means because if I want to accomplish something and get somewhere, they can be with me on it and make this process faster and easier and more efficient. And that's been one of the transformative learnings I've had since coming to Canada, that if I want to get this research done, or I want to get this internship, or I have this vision of something, it's great that people are better at me in many things because it just makes this process faster and more efficient for me. So I wouldn't leave any room for imposter syndrome. If you're feeling imposterous, you're in the wrong environment.
That's a great answer. How do you then distinguish between confidence and arrogance when you're, a certain level of accomplished?
I think confidence and arrogance is about where you're looking at. Where you're confident, you're looking up. You're looking towards how to get higher. When you're arrogant, you're looking down. You're looking at people who are lower than you. In both cases, you're relatively high. Hence, the input comes in. But in confidence, you don't care about how high you are. You care about how higher you could go. And as a result, you want people to come with you. You want to cling to people who are going higher. But when you're arrogant, you don't want people to come higher. You want to keep them down because you're looking down. So it's you are the same. It's your perspective that's different. And I would choose being confident every single time because it means you're looking up.
It's very inspiring. Okay. Um, there's something I'm curious to know about. I've noticed that there's a common denominator with people who repeatedly deliver well. And this denominator is that they have a positively framed relationship with setbacks and failures. What's your relationship with failure like?
Um, to be honest, I'm still looking for a chance to fail big. I've never failed big in the last 20 years, and that I think is one of the weaknesses. I've never taken such big of a risk that would give me this chance to fail big. I have this habit of trying to maximize the chance of something. If there's something I want to achieve, I'll do anything it takes such that the probability of achieving it is so high that in the last 20 years, that hasn't turned out to some expected value of at least one failure. But I've had small failures, small rejections here and there. And to be honest, I don't care. Like, if you're optimizing for the goal, the journey doesn't matter. If you're caring about going up some mountain, you're just seeing the mountain. You're not seeing how your movement is going. Whether this got accepted or rejected is just irrelevant. You're just looking up. But I do want to have a big failure, a moment in my life that I'm striving towards something very high. I'm putting all my abilities out there, maximal chance, and that still fails. That's something I'm kind of looking for, but the older you're getting, it's harder to get it. So to be honest, I have no idea what to do about that. But I do appreciate small failures. They're just calibrating your pathway up.
So you mentioned this idea of wanting to fail big, right? And that kind of shows to me a big appetite for risk, or at least one that you're intending to have or increase. Do you think there's like a any sort of cultural or developmental impact there with you coming from Iran to now Toronto? Was there like a difference between the cultures in the risk-taking profile? Because this is something we discuss on the podcast a lot, which is Toronto's risk-taking profile in comparison to some cities in the US, maybe, right? So was there a stark difference for you there? And how does Toronto fit into that?
Yeah, that I definitely agree with that perspective. To be honest, back home, people were more of a risk taker. To be honest, like Olympiad is a great example of it. When you're doing Olympiad, you have 20 to 25,000 students competing for becoming the best in biology that you could ever have. And top eight of those, eight out of these like 25,000 people, will get gold medals. And gold medal means you get direct entry to any Iranian university. You can just go wherever you want and study whatever you want. That's like the holy grail. Anything lower than that, you have to go back and prepare for the national university examination, which is something that now a million or more people are taking each year because everyone wants to get to university. So it's a giant risk if you think about it. What's the chance of you landing one of those eight seats between 25,000 people? So logically, you shouldn't do it. You should just prepare for the university examination. But you will be surprised that you see 25,000 Iranians are doing it each year. So to me, that shows Iranians have a big appetite for risk. But once you come to Toronto, you don't have that anymore. And that, to me, really translated in the startup space. Nobody is building very ambitious startups here, and nobody's funding those either. There are only a few handful examples of startups. Maybe Cohere is there, Umbo has been there, and a few more like Shopify way back that had this vision of we're going to take a very big risk and we either fail big or we moonshot. And there were some VCs that came along with them. But few of these instances occur here compared to San Francisco, where everyone is aiming moonshot and VCs are also spending moonshot. And that appetite for risk is important because the highest the risk, the higher the reward of that successful sample that occurs between all the failures. And that will give you way more growth or revenue per se than any of the small wins that you could accumulate. So taking big risks and expecting to fail most of the risks you take is a fundamental thing that we're missing in Toronto or in Canada in general. And that ultimately causes people with ambitions to drain to San Francisco because there VCs are willing to take the risk and they can find co-founders who are willing to take the risks alongside them.
You mentioned SF. I mean, let's be real. You could easily be in the Bay Area given your resume and the work that you're doing, but yet you're still anchoring yourself in Toronto. What's the reasoning behind this? What's this calculation you're making about Toronto's future versus Silicon Valley's present?
As much as I would love to say I'm planning to stay here long term, I'm also considering maybe moving to San Francisco after I graduate. I would say so that I would choose Toronto over San Francisco for my undergrad anytime. And that's because of the incredible amount of freedom, leverage, and learning I was able to have in undergrad. Even though here there's less risk taking and maybe there's less competitiveness in general, the ladder goes still high, which means when you don't know what you want to do with your life and you want to have the ability and chance to explore your own ideas, Toronto is the best place. It gives you all the resources you might need, it shows you all the ladders, and it also tells you that you can take risks, but it's okay if you fail because the ecosystem is built around that idea. And as a result, I was able to explore and learn and like do research or intern at places that completely changed my perspective of what I wanted to do in life. And now that I've grown to a point that I have a better sense of what direction I want to maximize in, and I'm willing to take bigger risks, it seems more natural for me to now move towards San Francisco. I ultimately think that's how AI was able to come up in the first place. Canada and Toronto provided that ground for AI to take its initial risks that weren't big, but it rather allowed researchers to explore what they liked, to explore what they believed and had an intuition which is true. And once we reached a position that, oh, this thing is now working, and we can now take bigger risks in orders of billions of dollars to see if this actually might scale, that's when people moved to United States and made companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, etc. So that's, I guess, the pathway as it goes. But hopefully, there's always people coming back to Toronto to keep building it, like Cohere, like etc., that allows the community here to thrive. But as it stands now, one has to go to SF to moonshot. You can't stay here for moonshot.
So you mentioned that Toronto was one of the first cities, like at the forefront of this field, right? And you're working at labs like INSERM, and you've worked at the Vector Institute and now Cohere, right? So this is basically like the lineage of AI Canadian royalty. Does that heritage or inheriting that legacy, is that like a weight on your shoulders? Is that something that ties you to the city? Do you feel that in your day to day, or is it something that you don't often think about?
I would say I care less about countries in general than most people. I think we're always so fixated on differences between each other, whether it's race or country, that we've created these divisions that no, this is Canada, that is United States. These are different entities, they're completely separate. But if you take one step higher, you realize that the true thing that will we can consider as a segregating line is the line of our species, is where Homo sapiens starts and ends. Anything after that, whether it's other species on this planet or species in other planets, that we can all agree that are completely different entities from us. But within our species, we are the same. We it doesn't matter if it's Canada or it's US or it's Iran or whatever country that's going up or down, it's the same humanity. It's the same group of Homo sapiens organisms working together. So I would say what matters more is driving that edge of that species forward. There are people who work on ensuring everything follows the edge as the edge becomes expanded and goes higher and higher. But I want to work at that edge and ensure that that edge is moving in the right direction with the maximal speed it can. And that just vanishes the effect and the importance of the country because then you realize that you're not doing work or caring or contributing to one certain geography. You're targeting all Homo sapienses. Your country just becomes the ground in which you're getting the resources to do so. And as time progresses, these countries also change. A few hundred years ago, the map looked way different from now. Who knows 1,000 years from now how it will look like? So I wouldn't optimize for a country's prosperity. I would optimize for the Homo sapiens's prosperity.
That's actually such a fresh perspective, especially given geopolitical stuff that we don't want to get into.
Yeah.
But you mentioned this idea like 100 years ago, 1,000 years from now. Let me ask you this. If in 100 years somebody were to read about Adib, right, what do you want them to understand about what drove you to do all these things to push forward that frontier, that edge? Not what you built per se, not what you did, but why you built it, why you did this thing.
I hope in 100 years I'm alive to answer that question myself rather than someone reading about it. But if someone has to read about it regardless, I think the main reason behind all of these is giving back to universe. I value life a lot, whether because I studied biology or AI or intelligence or whatever. I believe living and life is the ultimate blessing that an entity in this universe could be bestowed upon. And most things out there are not getting this privilege. Only these random sets of molecules in this specific planet have been able to get that for a small amount of time. And as much as it's privileged for me to live and enjoy it and do anything I want to do, I also think we should give back. And when you're giving back, who are you giving it back to? For me, the answer is the universe. We are consciousness of the universe. We are like its individual neurons. And if you think about the universe as this giant entity and us as the intelligence controlling it, you create this responsibility for humanity and humanity's outside that we should all collectively ensure the depth and breadth of intelligence goes higher and deeper, such that billions of years down the road, we can all control the universe, guide the universe, be the universe per se. And that's part of my life philosophy that we should contribute back. We should guide this. We should be part of it. You're a small stone. It will take billions of people or other sorts of creatures and billions of years of time, but you should play your role here. Um, as of course you get to have your own funs as a little human, enjoying things and getting some dopamine release.
Your answer really stood out to me because you kind of tied together a bunch of things here, right? You're in biology, yet you made this biology based analogy of how we're all like individual neurons. And it just ties in so perfectly well with your idea of people not being divided by country, but rather together as a species. It kind of, like how neurons come together to form a brain. I don't know, I'm not big in biology. How the same way how these people come together to form a people, a species. Which idea leads into the other? Is it this like understanding of biology that you've built over the years that leads into this idea and notion you have of us as a species? Or is it this idea that sort of allows you to dig into this analogy?
I think the root of it came from some German philosophy. Um, German philosophy is very interesting. I wouldn't recommend it though. But after I did Olympiad, there was a period of time that I was kind of free. I had nothing to do, so I was spending my time playing Witcher and studying German philosophy. And there's so many interesting ideas there, and it's a bit depressing. They say, "Oh, the universe is dead." Some other one says the universe is the corpus of God. It's just crazy things you hear. And back then is also the same time I was kind of trying to understand what should be my purpose in life, given that I've done the Olympiad and I'm kind of like free, so I have to like, figure out my next moves. And then you also hear that they say life is meaningless because anything you do, anything you accomplish, anything you imagine will die. At some point, everything will perish, everything will cease to exist. So your actions are meaningless because the end will all limit to zero. And that's when I realized that I have no answer to this. Doesn't matter how I thought about it, anything you do, it's all meaningless. And that was right. Like the philosophy was right. Like the nihilism ideology is right. Like you can't argue against it. You can't also be optimistic saying, no, at least I get to enjoy my life or whatever. It's all going to be vanishing. And so I spent a year just reading more and thinking about how you could find a counter to this philosophy. How would you define a new ideology around it? And that's when I realized that if everything goes to zero at some point, and that includes our universe, then there might be the ability for us to make new universes or prevent this universe from death, prevent that thing from getting to zero. And if we can do that, that's only through having sheer amounts of highly wide and highly deep intelligence. So to me, it seems if you're optimizing for that goal, you're not only contributing back to the universe, which is good because you got your everything from it, but also you're preventing everything's meaning to go to zero. Because if the universe continues to live forever, or there are new universes that are born out of it, or anything out there, that will prevent nihilism from being true because everything will continue indefinitely and give meaning to everything before it. So that's what I'm optimizing for.
This is such a unique perspective that you're talking about here as well. Like, I like that you're taking some sort of a biomedical approach to defining the universe's problem as like a patient with a long-term illness, and we're all, medics trying to extend that lifespan, and that becomes like the all-encompassing goal that brings us together. But what stands out to me more here is that, and I know I'm cognizant of the fact that Rudy and I are just what 2 years older than you, but this is not a common line of thinking or common perspective for people your age to have, right? And I'm curious to know if you've ever thought about what it is that, brings this stuff to light for you, or you've always been thinking along the boundaries of these things. Was it, certain events in your life, the fact that you've now got a multicultural sort of upbringing, and you've been exposed to so many different things, Toronto being a diverse city, the work you're doing being at the intersection of two major fields. What is it that brings this perspective to light for you?
To be honest, I think I didn't used to think like this maybe a few years ago. I'm pretty sure there was a time that I would just study biology each hour and feel super satisfied with my life. I think the perspective started coming when I really wanted to get to understand what's the meaning of my life, what's my purpose. I had, I think, too much time on hand to just keep thinking about these things. And I decided to think about it from first principles, right? Like, what is ultimately everything about? And I think I just drive this conclusion logically, given that there's just one universe and we know a lot about it. At least we know enough about it to know that nihilism could be true. But regardless, it's kind of like you want to think you are fated. You want to think that your visions and philosophies somehow tie back to your background and interests, as if you have this life of this main character or this story character whose interactions and peoples and interests and the future episodes and the previous episodes are somehow connected together very logically. So you start thinking maybe I should do stuff in AI and bio to make connections with my philosophy, or maybe my philosophy leads me to study some of these fields and connect these things together. It's I think just too much time to think about things and hope for having a meaningful life. Enough hope that makes you think everything is magically connected together for a fate beyond what you can see now.
Yeah, no, I feel you on this. I love thinking about all these like philosophical things about what our purpose is in life.
Yeah.
As a side note, I saw this like one quote somewhere that just meant so much to me for a certain amount of time that said, our purpose in life is to enjoy the passing of time. And it's conversation for a later time, but it's something I like to think about again and again. But the fact that you're thinking about these things at such an early point, it signifies that you have this desire or hunger for trying to understand things. So that leads me to ask, will there ever be a point where you think you've understood enough of the things in your field, in these things that interest you, whether you've built enough, you've contributed enough, or is this hunger for consuming and building infinite?
Mm. It's a matter of how much trust you have to your future self. Like, I have a bit of a trade-off between me in the past and me in the future. And I know that usually when you're living, you're considering yourself in the same plane of presence. Like you don't care about your future, you don't care about your past, you're just you. But I have this vision that there are multiple Adibs. There's Adib who's living last year, there's Adib who's living next year, there's Adib who's living 10 years from now. And we have a trade-off going on. On the one hand, we contribute to each other. Like I set some grounds for Adib in 10 years to accomplish something. On the other hand, I take stuff from him. You know, maybe if I go to this very nice restaurant today and get the feelings, the Adib next year won't enjoy it as much. So there's this trade-off between me and my future going on. And ultimately, it's about how much you trust you have to yourself. I think it's a very interesting question. Would you trust yourself in 10 years? How much trust do you have in you in 10 years? And to me, it's infinite. I have absolute the amount of trust I could possibly have in me in next year to 10 years, 100 years. And that gives me the ability to plan things through time. Because of the trust I have in my future, I can leave things to him. I can set grounds for him, and I can take things from him. We have this bi-directionality going on. So I don't think that hunger will ever stop. It's more like we have a shared vision as these Adibs living these many years, and each of us plays our role for the right time, with the right resources and the right actions. And these things just keep compounding, and we work towards each other. And all of this is built on the foundation of whether you could trust yourself in the future. Um, it's hard, it's challenging, like it's as if you're trusting a completely unpredictable thing. But once you trust yourself, that's when you can make some interesting plans and execute on. And you also feel you're not kind of alone, right? Because the Adibs of the future are kind of there. You just haven't met them.
I think there's a quote I read the other day which says ignorance is an information processing system, or an approach to information processing. And it boils down to basically when your analysis fails, that there's something for you to fall back on. It's your ideology and whatever, right? And to see that you're thinking about all of this when you probably don't necessarily have to, right? Or it doesn't feel like that from the outside in. I'm curious what your relationship looks like with the word normal. Like, what stands out to you as something that's, consistent with a normal undergrad experience? And what made you choose the path which, from the outside, looks like an intense one, right? Was there a motivating factor from a very early age? Or once you started thinking about these things, you just couldn't stop and you felt like, that there was a sort of purpose driving you here?
Oh, that's a deep question, to be honest. From one side, though, I don't have much discipline in life. I'm a very, very motivationally bound person. If I don't like something or I'm not super interested in something, I'm extremely stubborn not to do it. And this is one of my big weaknesses. Until now, I've been kind of lucky that things I'm able to do and things I like and my philosophies have kind of been in the same direction. So they've been feeding on each other and things have been working. And I've been working on like kind of doing things you might not super like and be interested in. To me, a normal life and a hardworking life and a bad life are just the same. They are lives. We put ladders and types and features and everything to them to kind of categorize them and compare them as monkey brains we are. But all of us have the same amount of time. We are all in the same field. And that makes all lives valuable with the same amount because they're able to interact with their surroundings with time with the same extent that any other person can. It's just that what you notice, what you realize, and how those interactions goes, that's different. So I don't see any life more or less normal or more or less successful or more or less interesting or whatever. It's more like what I like to do in life and what I believe is right. And as long as those turn the same direction, I'll just go and do it. And I don't care about whether it's hard or not, like whether it's hard or like it's challenging or it's like I'm not resource full or whatever. I just care about what I like to do and what matters to be done. And through my undergrad, I've done interesting things. Like I've been doing a lot of student clubs with my friends. We've had the chance of doing a bunch of drama stuff together. It's been, I would say, a very rich undergrad experience, like your college experience, as you would say. But all of that has just been part of what I believe is right to do. And in the end, it's just living your life. It's there's no life that's more meaningful or less meaningful than your life. It's just about how you like to live. It's a normal distribution. The more right you go, the more left you go. From an outsider, it's just a normal distribution. You like right, you like left. It's up to you. It's just going to be like that.
I want to build off or bounce off of that community thing you mentioned. The work that you've been doing with GenAI Genesis.
Yes.
Can you give us a quick segment on that? What's that been like? Let's go over a bit of the logistics behind it because I'm sure it's a lot of work trying to organize One of Canada's largest AI hackathons.
Exactly. So, just for the listeners here, GenAI Genesis is Canada's largest AI hackathon, which received about 2,200 applicants from 20 countries and 100 universities last year, and we were able to get 600 people in during March for 2 days of hacking. When we started was, I think, from the ChatGPT moment in 2023. We saw that you can just make wrappers and we call that projects, and somehow it's super nice. So we thought, why not just put a hackathon like that? So we did a very mini hackathon. GenAI Genesis 2024 is someone nobody knows. 2023 is something nobody knows about. We had like 20 people together just building wrappers. And back then, building wrappers was cool. Like you could just make this app in a few hours, and everyone would be like, "Oh my God!" And they would keep asking you how you made it. In GenAI Genesis 2024, we brought that to the market. Like we brought students from anywhere. We had like 300 people. And from 2025, we scaled it to 600. And hopefully next year, we're able to scale it to over 1,000 and kind of grab the title of the largest hackathon in Canada from Hack the North and the Waterloo folks. They've had it for over a decade. It's time to bring the title back to Toronto. But how do we organize a hackathon like that is just about people with the same vision, passion, and talent to execute. If you break down a hackathon to its fundamental pieces, it's human resources and financial resources. And financial resources is a factor of your human resources because you spend time to get money from sponsors. So it's just human resources. And what we did was we established a very core team of my close friends that are very great at what they do, whether it's management, whether it's partnerships, whether it's marketing. They're great at it. They're rocking it. And they're in the same vision that they believe this hackathon is a good thing to do. It's useful for the community and they like AI here and there. And that core team then brings their friends and their environments. And suddenly you have like the major student clubs in Toronto partnering together, like 100 to 200 people overall to organize this large scale hackathon. And the higher you are in, between these people, the less the less you realize how like the value of human resources. Ultimately, if you want to do anything great in the community, I would say you need to have a few people who are like you, passionate, and have the right vision and have the talent to execute. And make sure those people are alongside you. The rest just kind of follows from it. Without even know realizing it, you suddenly have the ability to organize large scale events and drive impact for the community that you enjoy dealing with. So why not contribute back to it and just connect industry folks with AI folks and students and just some free food and call it a day.
Beautiful answer. I love that you're trying to usurp Hack the North's status as one of the largest hackathons and bring it to Toronto. Let me ask you this: what else do you think is missing from the Toronto tech ecosystem in general that we should have? Something that you want to see built here that doesn't yet exist?
I think there's a lot missing. To be honest, we don't have an ecosystem per se. We have some people, some events, some initiatives, but there's no ecosystem, or in the sense that there's no culture. There's not this mindset of people wanting to build together, raising money, building startups, driving revenue for shareholders. Every time a student or person or a builder reaches that ambition that they can do it now, they just move to San Francisco and they get it done there. Few of them remain in Canada. Of course, we need them, like companies like Shopify, like Cohere, like Ada, like way more that have stood here, have built, billion-dollar businesses. Those are great. Like we need more of these. And I have no idea how you could accomplish that. It's not a matter of talent. We've had talent through time. It might be a matter of capital, but it's hard to deploy capital when the returns are much lower than US. And it's really not something the government can fix because the government can establish the regulations and the infrastructure for venture capital money to flow, and the founders can feed on that to drive and generate businesses. A good friend of mine's analogy here is if you think about founders as one part, VCs as another part, and think about the government as a third part, the founders' job is to make money for shareholders. How do they do it? They make the best companies. A VC's job is to make money for their partners who are giving them money by investing it to those best companies. And the government's job is to make money for the country by making this country the best place such that these best companies are built in the first place. In Canada, VCs are kind of trying to do the government's job. They're not taking the risks. They're just going to distribute the money efficiently, try to get some businesses to incorporate in Canada and like give them the money too. But a VC can't do the job of the government. And so as a result of that, the founder also doesn't have the ground to make the best companies here. So they go to US. And the VC's job is to make investments to those best companies which are going to US. So they have to follow them. So how do we fix is by fixing the government first.
You pointed out this like triangular interaction system that has founders, VCs, and the government. I'm very confident that there's no lack of founders in Canada. Sure, like they might be migrating over to SF, but there's no lack of like Canadian founder talent here. Do you think it's the VCs or the government that kind of has to take that step up to ensure that that talent remains here and that these three pieces can work together to build up this Toronto tech ecosystem or Canadian tech ecosystem?
I do think it's government, or more so it's the foundation that the government sets. If you're not making this country the best place to build the best companies, you will not be able to keep both the founders and the VCs here. And a great example of a country who's doing great is UAE. UAE's government is making their country one of the best places to do business. And oh, guess what? Businesses move there. US is doing the same thing. It's only in Canada that we haven't been doing that. Like there was a time that we were doing it and we're kind of head to head shoulders with US. But at some point we just decided that no, we're not going to make this the best place to build the best companies. And of course, you're going to start losing your founders and VCs. AI started, deep learning started in the University of Toronto. Like we had the talent there. The best kind of founders were there, but they moved to US to make the best companies. And the VCs there funded them to do so. And now US is going to take all the revenues of the modern AI probably, but most of it's not coming back to Canada. So I do think it's something that the government can fix, but who can fix the government is another question of its own.
Okay, I think that's a good point for us to segue into a segment that we like to do with all of our guests, and just to get to know you a bit more on the personal side of things. So we name these as rapid fire questions, but they're not really rapid. So feel free to think about them. Some of them are thinkers. So I'll fire us off with, what is your go-to comfort meal after a long work day?
Shawarma is my comfort meal. It's just goated. Cheap protein, great sauces, accessible and fast. It's just the best food out there for comfort.
Great answer. Okay, would you rather spend a day in a cabin in the woods coding by yourself or doing archery also at the cabin in the woods?
I think I would choose archery. Yeah, because I'm coding all the time. So if there's one day that I can do something else, I'll choose archery for some time. And there's no
Nice.
internet in the cabin, right? That might change my answer.
Well, if you're coding, there will
Actually,
be.
there can be internet if you want one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
now you're making it hard to make a decision. I might code again then. Yeah,
Oh,
not
okay.
the best
Well,
idea there.
okay. What is the most random thing that you've ever built just for fun?
The most random thing we ever built was a button. Like literally like a very like I mean like a physical button. So like we were it was in middle school. We wanted to dissect mouse. And so we essentially made a button that you would press, and after you press that button, a lever would fall and will cut that mouse. That's the most random thing I built. Uh, Not that I'm
You
proud of it, but like we had to
you
dissect it, so we just engineered a bit.
I can't believe you built a guillotine in
Yeah.
middle school. Very, very French Revolution
actually,
of
you
you.
modernized the guillotine. That is wild. Okay, if you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, one on one, who would it be?
Oh, I have a lot of options here. I think I want to have a dinner with Cyrus. Cyrus the Great is the first, is the Persian Empire who made the Persian Empire. And he was a man, like like he's the goat, you know. He's the person who defined justice. Like if you think about any ideology that humanity has comes from someone at some point because monkeys don't have ideologies. And that man himself created the ideology of medicine, justice, social rights, equity. Like just crazy to me how someone could have that vision like 3,000 years ago to define these terms. So I want to have a chat with Cyrus.
Well, just to show how far we've come from then, what is your guilty pleasure tech tool or gadget that you can't live without, but you really should be able to?
I think I kind of enjoy watching some animes here and there. So that might be my guilty pleasure. It's like kind of gives you some dopamine boost when the days are tough and you have things to do.
Okay, that's fair. Completely valid. What is one app or tool you think is totally underrated?
Uh, Gemini deep research is extremely underrated. Like, I can't imagine people are nowadays not using Gemini deep research for anything. Like, whenever I have an idea of what to do, like certain task or research or thing, it's one tool, one Gemini deep research will give me so much information to digest and understand the problem space deeply that no amount of thinking or Google search will. So, highly recommend it. Best deep research Geminis.
Oh, I'm gonna check it out after this then. If you could instantly master any skill overnight, what would it be?
Hmm, one skill completely mastered. I would maximize the skill of probably leadership. I I think leadership is a skill that if you maximize a lot of things will go up with it. Like if you have a graph of skills, leadership has so many connections, to communication, to ambition, to thinking, to planning, like a lot of things. So I would maximize leadership because kind of everything follows from it.
Probably one of personally, I think that's one of the best answers I've heard to this question. If you could go back and give advice to yourself when you were just starting out your tech career, what would you say?
Don't take mad 137. No, just kidding. Um, uh, I wouldn't think I would give advice to myself. Like, if I can give advice, I'd probably tell him to invest in Nvidia or something. Just sell your kidney, invest in Nvidia. That would be like my financial advice. But tech advice, I would think I would just leave the guy be. Like, the guy will probably figure out what to do. If I tell him what he should do, he won't do it. Like, I know how stubborn I am, so I'll just leave the guy. But I'll make sure he invests in either Nvidia or some other thing that will make more money. Having more money, it just makes life easier. So that's the financial advice I would give my younger self.
Temporal self-awareness is crazy. I love it. Okay. If your life was a movie, what would it be titled?
Where do you even get these questions? It's crazy. If your life was a movie, what would it be titled? I would call it the the journey of Adib, something like that. On the journey of Adib, like thing in that line.
That's a pretty straightforward answer. I like that. Self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. Probably the most important rapid fire question. Cats or dogs?
I think cats are cuter than dogs. I like cute things, so I would choose cats.
Okay, fair enough. And with that, we come to the conclusion of this episode. Thank you for coming on Not a Minimum Viable podcast, Adib.
Thank you for having me.
Before we head off, do you have any words of wisdom or any advice you want to give to our listeners?
Um, I don't think a 20-year-old's advice is that much of a value. So what I would say is just if you're doing anything in your life, just enjoy it, have fun, and make sure that you're contributing back to the universe a bit. And if you happen to be a student, I'll see you at GenAI Genesis 2026 at March at U of T.
Thank you for tuning in and listening. Make sure to leave a comment, to follow, and thank you.